So, welcome everyone. This is Meridian Grace. I'm back in Austin after a little journey, and my goodness, we have all had such a challenge with our temperatures. Coming into freezing temperature, much colder than where I was in North Carolina, which I think is really interesting. Somehow the gods were with me, and I flew in on Sunday, and I was actually the last flight they allowed into the Austin airport. So I was here for all of the weather that we all got to experience together. It was quite something. We had slumber parties here because we were the fortunate ones to have actually electricity and water. But while I was gone, I had the most extraordinary opportunity, and that's what I'm going to be talking to y'all about. I spent quite a bit of time with Dr. Daved Rosensweet, and he's one of the world's experts on menopause and hormones for women. I learned so much from him, and I just want to show you, he's written this fabulous book. It's called Happy, Healthy Hormones, and the subtext is How to Thrive in Menopause. And this book is written really well for the layperson. There's a few areas that are a little heavy into science, but he always apologizes, and you can skip over them if you want to. But he has really helped to support us as women and the men who love us to understand what's going on with the female body during menopause, but more importantly, what we can do. And it appears that our female hormones, our estrogen and progesterone, and also a masculine hormone called testosterone, are incredibly important for us throughout our lives, whether or not we are ovulating or can have children or not, or menstruating. And the key thing he continues to harp on is that we want to be functioning, high-functioning women throughout our life. And if we don't have, in particular, enough estrogen, we end up losing bone density. And if we don't have enough testosterone, we end up losing muscle mass. And estrogen, to a degree, also has a lot to do with our muscle mass. And the end result of that is two really not very fun things. One is women having to wear Depends because they don't have the muscle control to prevent incontinence, urinary incontinence, and to some extent bowel incontinence, but in particular urinary incontinence. And that's certainly not something that supports a woman's sense of self and independence and ease with her body, is the need to wear diapers as she gets older. The other one is if we start losing our muscle control, well, that's the muscle control in the urinary tract, we also start really losing it in the rest of our muscles as well. And that has great consequences for our ability to move, to be flexible, to pick up things, to do things for ourselves, and basically to be independent. The other thing that estrogen is so important for is our brain function, our cognition. And if we aren't getting enough estrogen, I'm going to talk to you how our body produces estrogen when we no longer have estrogen being produced by our ovaries. But if we don't have enough estrogen, we basically are going to be losing memory and concentration capacities, and possibly even creative brain function. So that also is not very much fun for us as we get older. The other one is bone density. And bone density is quite a challenging thing. Many women find that if they break a bone, particularly a hip bone, that's, according to statistics anyway, very likely the beginning of the end of their death, and they die pretty soon afterwards. The process of rehabilitation after hip surgery is quite challenging, and if you don't have muscle mass and the ability to really function well, that can be a serious problem and be so devastating for a woman that she may not even want to continue to live. So one of the ways that we can prevent these things happening to us as we get older is by making sure that we have hormone function. Now, we also, according to David, and I'm not totally sure about this because I think we could do testing to see if we are able to get our bodies to support us in producing hormones the way we want to with homeopathics. But his book is all about the use of bioidentical hormones. And I'm going to talk with you about the common bioidentical hormones and a special patent that David has created for delivery of bioidentical hormones in a way that is far safer than even what we get from compounding pharmacies. The bottom line is this: in order for the hormones to be delivered to our bodies safely, especially estrogen, progesterone often, and testosterone for a woman, we need to deliver it through the skin. There can be really serious problems using estrogen orally, and I don't know that we can, as women, we really don't want to use progesterone in an injectable. It's just way too heavy. That's really just for men. So we do need to deliver it through the skin, and in order for the hormones to get into the skin, we need to be able to make our skin more porous. And the different chemicals that are used to do that are to some degree toxic. So David figured out that he could actually deliver the hormones to a woman without producing that toxicity by actually using organic oils. And he uses evening primrose oil, borage oil, and we call it jojoba oil. It's really much more a wax than it is an oil. But the blend of those will help to get through the skin, carrying natural hormones that are basically made from a yam called discosaria. So it's all plant form things that are in bioidentical hormones, be they compounded using the creams and the gels, which have these chemicals to be able to get them into the skin, or whether we're just using the organic oils, which David has a patent on and has created for to help us to get what we need without causing any harm. So those are a couple of the magical little things that I learned about, and I really love where he started with all this. If you, like myself, have been aware of the whole history of alternative medicine for a long time, you've probably come across Dr. Jonathan Wright. He's a very, very outspoken guy, and he and David went to the same medical school. David was a year ahead of him, and Jonathan followed him, and they became fast friends. And both of them were fascinated by women's hormones. David actually, for many years, was doing home deliveries for women. He delivered over 4,000 babies. So he's really pretty much, his practice has been very centered around women from the get-go. Jonathan basically got into developing a fabulous lab. Interestingly enough, it's called MERIDIAN Labs. And he developed a very special test for hormones, and it's called a urine metabolite test. And most doctors don't use urine metabolite tests. They use blood hormone tests. As we get older, but really anytime, I think what we want to see is not so much what the hormones are that are in our blood, but what we want to really see is what hormones have actually made it through our system and have we actually been able to utilize. That's the most important part. Have you been able to absorb and use your estrogen? And if you have, the breakdown process showing that you did do that is going to show up in your urine. So if it's in the blood, that doesn't necessarily mean that your body is going to receive it into the receptor sites on your organs and your cells to keep your bones and your brain and your muscles happy. It just means it's there. But the metabolites show that they actually did their job. So basically, Dr. Jonathan Wright developed this urine test, which David does with all the women he works with. But he doesn't do it until after he has you balanced. And what I'm going to do today is to show you how he does this. And I love it because I honestly, and you've probably heard me talk about this many times, I believe that our body is all wise. And that what we want to do is support our body in giving it what it needs. And so that it can do its job. Okay? And in this case, instead of working off of a bunch of lab results, what we're going to do is work off of your personal experience. Because when we have too much or too little of estrogen, we have totally different symptoms. When we have too much or too little of progesterone, we have totally different symptoms. And when we have too much or too little testosterone, we have completely different symptoms. And that way we know whether we want to increase the amount of estrogen we're taking or decrease it. Increase the amount of progesterone we're taking or decrease it. Increase the amount of testosterone we're taking or decrease it. And we do it based on how we're feeling, what our symptoms are. Now, if you're a menopausal woman or a man who's in a relationship with a menopausal woman, it's very common for there to be a lot of very uncomfortable symptoms. And your loving, beautiful, precious female friend or yourself, you may not know yourself anymore. And neither might your partner, because our mood swings can be so great. We can be so miserable with hot flashes and temperature changes. There's so many different things that can happen to us. Our sleep can just go into the toilet. We can find that we have weird cravings. Doing nothing different, you might discover that you gain weight. There are all of these different symptoms that can happen that make it really hard for us to deal with the transition. If you've been taking really good care of yourself, if you have great genes, you might get to experience the menopause like I did, which had no symptoms. It was just amazing. I just stopped bleeding and I had no symptoms. But I find that that's very rare, and the majority of women that I talk to have some really horribly uncomfortable symptoms. And it's just awful for them to go through menopause. So if that's the case, I personally think, and you may have heard this from me many times, that it's worth, first of all, using the brilliant information from Dr. Rosensweet to ascertain whether you have too much or too little of your hormones. Work with foods that will support those hormones. Work with your mitochondria so that your adrenal glands can do what they're designed to do. Do some emotional work like we've talked about in other YouTubes with the polyvagal theory and homeopathics. And also start taking homeopathic hormones and seeing if we can clear the symptoms. If we can, we'll do the same thing that we would do if we were taking bioidenticals. As soon as our symptoms are clear, we can do a urine metabolite test, and we can find out if our body is actually using the hormones that our body is creating for itself with the stimulus of a homeopathic remedy, rather than actually contributing the physical hormone to the body. And if that's the case, we're in great shape. And perhaps every year or two, as long as we've got our symptoms managed, we might want to do a urine metabolite test and make sure that our hormones are up to snuff, that we're actually getting the benefit that we need to make sure that our bones are healthy, that our brains are healthy, that our muscles are healthy. And that's one route to go. The other route to go is to actually use the bioidentical hormones that Dr. Rosensweet recommends, or basically go to your practitioner that you trust, maybe tell her that there's another option for delivery of hormones, and have your practitioner pick up this book. And what Dr. Rosensweet does day in and day out, all day long, is he trains doctors, nurse practitioners, midwives, and different, well, those basically professionals all over the world who want to work specifically with menopause and hormones. Now, the other piece I want to share with you, and I'm not sure that I've talked in a long time about the work of T.S. Wiley, but that's what I used to do for the longest time, and I thought that the work that she calls biomimetics, she developed. But it turns out that Jonathan Wright and David were doing this many, many, many years before she started to do any work with hormones. So when the two of them came out of medical school and residency, they basically said, look, women have this very unique cycle. And perhaps I should draw this and put these drawings for you at the end of our YouTube so that you can see what they look like. But the bottom line is that when a woman has her period, she begins to she's had a small amount of estrogen throughout her entire cycle. Estrogen is always there in a nice normal amount. And then right about day 8, she starts to increase her estrogen so that at day 12, she has a peak of estrogen, and sometimes as late as day 14, and then it drops to practically nothing. And right after that peak, when it drops to nothing, is when she ovulates. Okay? And then she starts to build up just a tiny bit more, and then through the whole rest of the cycle, she has the same amount of estrogen. So we see this small amount of estrogen going through the whole, let's say she has a normal 28-day cycle. Some women have a longer cycle, some people have a shorter cycle, some people never get regulated, they're all over the place as far as their cycle. But we're, as women, designed to be in a beautiful relationship with the moon. The moon has a 28-day cycle. At new moon, women all over the world tend to have their period. At full moon, women all over the world tend to ovulate. And so we can actually divide the month up, or a 28-day cycle up, into our new moon to full moon phase. And during that time, where estrogen is the most dominant, what we find is that women who tend to have low estrogen feel the best the second week of their cycle, because that's when their estrogen is building. And the rest of the time they don't have enough estrogen, and then they'll have the symptoms of low estrogen. The symptoms of low estrogen is warm rushes or night sweats, sleep disturbance, mental fogginess and or forgetfulness. So this can happen when we're really young too. It doesn't have to only be during our menopause if you have too little estrogen. Weight gain that tends to primarily be in the thighs, the hips, or the buttocks. Women who don't have enough estrogen can have dry vagina, but not only dry vaginas, dry eyes or dry skin. And then we also have a sense of normalcy, which is what I was talking about a moment ago, only during the second week if you're still having your period, because that's when you'd have that bigger amount of estrogen. So the rest of the month you would have less, but you might even do better if you were having your estrogen supported so that you had a normal amount of estrogen during that second week of the cycle. Okay? Also, when there's too little, women can have hot flashes, which so many women experience as they go into menopause, temperature swings, a racing mind, particularly at night, that makes it hard to sleep. You just can't stop thinking. Fatigue or reduced stamina, so you just don't feel like doing very much. Some people would think they have chronic fatigue, but it might just really be low estrogen. Episodes of a rapid heartbeat and or palpitations. Pain during intercourse. And then women are supposed to glow. When we have enough estrogen, we tend to glow. Our skin is just beautiful. And that loss of glow happens when we have too little estrogen. Also, back and joint pain and intestinal bloating, which so many people are complaining about now, and also can be contributed to by so many other ways. And oftentimes women who have headaches and migraines, that clears up when they get enough estrogen, particularly if they never had them before they went into menopause. So those are the symptoms of too little estrogen. We rarely see too much estrogen in a woman in menopause. In fact, it's kind of the opposite of the definition. And so if a woman has too much estrogen, she'll experience breast tenderness. So let's say we're doing a modulation to see how much estrogen you need. And let's say that your primary symptom is brain fog and concentration issues. And maybe dry vagina and eyes, okay, which is just really common for so many women when they go into their menopause. You would continue to take estrogen until those symptoms went away. And if you notice that the symptoms went away, but you're not at the cognition level that you'd like to be, you could continue to take more estrogen, adding bit by bit each day until you get to the point where you have breast tenderness. When that happens, then you cut back one drop if you're using David's hormones. Or it would be, if you're using a syringe, you'll probably have lines on the syringe. You'd cut back one line. Or if you're using cream from a jar, you would cut back a tiny, like an eighth of a teaspoon or 1/16 of a teaspoon, depending upon what you're using as your delivery system. So the primary symptoms of too much estrogen would be breast tenderness, breast fullness, feeling impatient, but still very mentally clear. It's interesting, right? Because your brain is working really well when you have too much estrogen, but you can also be irritable. Pelvic cramps with or without bleeding, nipple tenderness, malaise, and this is an interesting one that many women will experience, which is water retention. And if really an excessive dose, like if you didn't modulate up slowly like we were talking about, you could experience a hot flash. but typically your hot flashes are in the too little realm. So what you would be doing, basically, is if you had any of the unpleasant experiences of too little estrogen, you would increase your estrogen till you got to the place where you had some breast tenderness, and then take it back to where you have no breast tenderness. And at that point, you should be really maximally functioning well with none of the symptoms of too little estrogen. So that's how we use your own body instead of a blood test to see how much or how little to increase or decrease your hormones. And then we make sure that you haven't been taking more than is considered healthy from years and years of research and doing algorithms and all the stuff that David has done. He's a math geek. It's just amazing. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is they did studies on thousands of young, healthy women looking at the actual amounts of estrogen and progesterone that they had during their cycle. So we've just talked about the estrogen side. We can now, if you like, talk about the progesterone side, because this part is really important for women, especially around that whole arena of sleep. But, and this also is very important for young women, because many women who are still menstruating have horrible periods. And the reason why is they have too much estrogen and not enough progesterone. So we can look at these symptoms, and if you're still of menstruating age, we can consider what we could do to help you. And definitely, my personal preference would be to start you with a homeopathic remedy. So before I get into talking about progesterone, I want to talk about why when I say take a hormone in a homeopathic format, or look for a homeopathic remedy that will deal with any blockages that are happening to prevent your ovaries from producing normal amounts of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. You know, why would we want to consider a homeopathic remedy instead of taking bioidentical hormones? And the reason is this. First of all, a homeopathic remedy is not physical. A homeopathic remedy is energy. It's information. And it's information that you're taking that stimulates your body to find its own answers. It stimulates your body to be more effective. It stimulates your body to be more healthy without an interference with herbs or medications that actually force your body to make a change. Allopathic medications, and actually most herbs, are designed to push us one direction or another, typically other than what our body is doing. Not always, because if we have a really well-educated herbalist, they may actually recognize the incredible wisdom of the body and know that our bodies are here to try and increase our lifespan and the quality of our lives, and they're doing the best they can given the circumstances that we put them into. So basically, when we take herbs or when we take medications, if we're too hot, we are taking herbs or medications to cool us down. If we're too dry, we're taking herbs or medications to make us more moist, and vice versa. When we take a homeopathic remedy, what we're doing is we're taking something that speaks directly to our autonomic nervous system. And if you've listened to a lot of my YouTubes, you'll know that basically your autonomic nervous system is here to preserve life. It's here to keep us alive, no matter what. And so it's doing hundreds of millions of things for us, literally every second. And when we give a homeopathic remedy to the body, I'll explain to you what that is in a minute, when we give a homeopathic remedy to the body, we're actually making a request. We're making a request of our autonomic nervous system to find the answer that will dilute the symptoms that are causing us a problem. That we're also asking the body to find its own resource solution to the problem that we're having. And here's the way that we do this. Sorry if you've already heard about homeopathy from me in the past, you can skip over this part. And we'll probably have it annotated at the bottom of the YouTube so that you can just skip over that section. But for those of you who haven't, it's really important to understand how this works. So I'm going to use an example that most of us are very aware of, and that's cutting onions. And when you cut an onion, 1,000 out of 1,000 people are going to have burning, stinging eyes. And then 500 to 999 are going to have a watery, runny nose, and 250 to 500 will sneeze. And those are 3 of the most common symptoms of cutting an onion. If we wanted to make homeopathic onion, we're not going to give somebody a bite of onion or onion juice. We're going to take 1 drop of onion juice and put it in a separate little bottle. And we have our 1 drop going in there, and then we're going to add 99 parts of, in this case, a liquid, be it either water or alcohol. We'll put a lid on it, and then we'll tap it 100 times. There's 100 drops altogether, including the original substance. And when we do that, it energizes the original substance. Now, that's not homeopathic. That would just be a tincture. But to make it homeopathic, we're going to take 1 drop from that first bottle. We're going to put that into an empty second bottle. And once again, we're going to put in 99 drops of a fluid like water or alcohol. The alcohol helps to prevent any bacteria from growing in it. And then we're going to put the lid on that and tap that 100 times. And that makes what we would call a 2C. C is the Roman numeral for 100. That's why we're calling it C's. If we were diluting it by tens, we would call it an X. If we were diluting it by 1,000, we would call it an M. But that's how we do that. Now that's a 2C that we have here in this bottle. It's been diluted twice. And if we want to make a 3C, we'll take 1 drop from that, put that into an empty bottle, once again add 99 drops of fluid, and put a lid on and tap that 100 times, and that makes a 3C. We can make higher and higher numbers of C, which are greater and greater dilutions. Typically, I use 30 Cs very often in my practice, sometimes 200 Cs. But by the time we get to a 6C, if we were to look at 1 drop under an electron microscope, we could no longer find any onion. It's so dilute that according to Oblongata's law, there's nothing left of the original substance. What is left, however, is information. And that information, for some mystical reason, can speak directly to our autonomic nervous system. It's like a language that the autonomic nervous system understands. And it will take that information and give it to you, and your body will then do what it needs to do to dilute the symptoms that onion causes, like the watery, runny eyes, the watery, runny nose, and the sneezing. I use that remedy a lot when people have allergies here in Austin to some of the different pollens. And they come in with Kleenex stuffed up their nose, their eyes are red and burning and stinging, and they're sneezing. And typically before they walk out of the house, everything's dried up and they're not sneezing. It's pretty amazing. When it's an acute problem, it clears up very quickly. When it's a chronic problem, it clears up quickly, but it's still a matter of typically at least a few weeks to support the body in that process of taking on a new pattern so that it's no longer doing a chronic thing. So when we use a homeopathic of estrogen or progesterone or testosterone, what those will do is they help to, first of all, remove any symptoms that you have from either too much or too little. That's the amazing thing about the homeopathic remedy. You've just given it the information, and then the body uses that information to look at how it can best use it to serve you. So either too much or too little can be balanced by a homeopathic remedy. And so that's why I suggest that we start with a homeopathic remedy that basically helps your body be more effective at what it's doing. And if that's not going to work for us, then we can start looking at other things as well. So, back to our progesterone. So progesterone, if you have too little, we typically see a sleep disturbance. So typically what we're going to do with progesterone, if we're going to take it, is we're going to recommend that you take it just before you go to bed at night, so that it can really help you with sleep. And the best place that one would put on testosterone in an external form would be on the inner thighs. Progesterone would be on the internal thigh and the soft tissue for a woman. Progesterone is greatly talked about here in the Happy, Healthy Hormones, and David goes into the medical reasons why, and it's really much too much for us to talk about now, that if you're not getting benefit from the cream, your body might need to take it in a special oral pill, like a pearl form. But I don't want to get into all that today because it's just way too much information. For now, I think it's really helpful for us to understand what the symptoms are if we have too little progesterone, which is very common for women in menopause, and too much progesterone, what that would mean to us, so that we can help to modulate ourselves. And when we have too little progesterone, we oftentimes, if we're young and healthy, will have too much estrogen. So it's like the estrogen is dominant and there's not enough progesterone. So there's sleep disturbance, but this is something that's rampant in the world today, not only sleep, but increased anxiety. And obviously now we have plenty of reasons for people to be anxious with what's going on with COVID, but we don't need to add any more anxiety to the picture by not having enough progesterone support. Mood disturbances that can sometimes be really, really severe. And oftentimes a woman will have way too little progesterone the days before her period, because that's when we're supposed to be having very high levels of progesterone. And if we don't, you'll see women with really severe emotional challenges around their period. Also, a woman can get hot flashes from too little progesterone. Breast tenderness, just like when you have too much estrogen, which is interesting, because both of those are signs of too much, actually hot flashes is too little estrogen, but breast tenderness is definitely one of too much estrogen. And new and or enlarged breast lumps, as well as fibroids and or endometriosis. So both breast fibroids and uterine and ovarian fibroids can happen from too little progesterone. And then the whole gamut of the PMS symptoms, where we just feel terrible a certain number of days before the period. There also can be period irregularities where we have a very small flow one month, a really huge flow another month, or many days apart where we're not having a cycle that we can count on. And when there's too little progesterone, there can also be decreased libido, and women can find it really difficult to relax. And the other part is water retention, when there's too little progesterone. So these are very common symptoms of young women who are menstruating, and particularly the PMS, where they can have intense mood changes, where they can have cravings for all kinds of foods. Chocolate is one of the big ones. I have totally different food needs during the 5 to 7 days before the period, and sometimes extending into the period, than the rest of the month. I mean, we can literally have a different body type in the days before the period than the rest of the month. Many years ago, I used to do an awful lot of something called metabolic typing, where we had 5,000 body types. And some women had a totally different body type during their menstrual cycle and before than out of the rest of the month. It was just fascinating, and they needed totally different support and diet during the time before their period than the rest of the month and during the period. Okay, then the other thing with progesterone is if you have too much, instead of not being able to fall asleep, you can be really drowsy, and that can continue all day long. You can also wake up feeling groggy and edgy. You can have a sense of physical instability, so issues with balance. Hot flashes if you're taking way too much progesterone externally. You can also really feel depressed. And slight dizziness, you can feel like you have vertigo, and leg discomfort or pain, and water retention again. So that's what happens when a woman has either too little or too much progesterone. Now we're going to take a look at testosterone. And we typically think of testosterone as a male hormone, but all men and women have all three hormones. We all have estrogen, we all have progesterone, and we all have testosterone. And if we have too little testosterone, we just won't have much of a libido. And we can also have a loss of sense of security. Like we just can feel very insecure in the world and have a difficult time making things happen. The other thing that can happen with too little is we can have body hair loss, very low levels of energy and stamina, but also flabbiness and muscular weakness. Particularly, you've probably seen it where women have, really large flabbiness underneath their arms. And that is a sign of too little testosterone. They can also experience that in the cheeks, and that happens to many of us as we get older. Our cheeks start to sag, our necks start to sag, and also the thighs. And then if we have too much testosterone, we can be super hyper aggressive and also experience excessive oiliness of the skin and even acne and pimples. And also, a woman can start experiencing excess hair growth on her body and her face. And if she's taking testosterone, the location where she puts it can also get hairy. And the area that's recommended that you place testosterone as a woman is on the perineal area or perianal. Typically men are told to place it perianally, but I've always suggested that if they're going to use testosterone, that they place it on their perineum as well, having access closer to the testicles. And I wanted to mention to you that estrogen is not just estrogen. There's all of these different parts of estrogen. There's estradiol, estriol, estrone. Those are the three major ones, and altogether I believe there are 7. For a long time, Jonathan and David were recommending estriol, which was all 3 of those primary forms of estrogen blended together. But what they discovered after doing the studies with thousands of women is that if you use estradiol and estriol, which they now call biest, The estriol supports your body in producing your estrone. And estrone has some very special qualities in protecting women from breast cancer. So anyway, they use Biest in their preparations that are placed into organic oil, and then progesterone. So that's kind of the basics. And I think it's important that we also understand that for a long time, the only hormones that were really available to women were synthetic hormones. And those are totally different than using these plant-based natural hormones. There was something called progestins, and the progestins created enormous problems for women, from heart disease to breast cancer to just all kinds of issues. And there's major studies that David talks about in his book with all of the data and the exact numbers of the problems that women had by using progestins and something, well, basically a horse urine based form of estrogen. And a horse's urine is very, very different in its makeup than human estrogens. So that's why there were so many problems when women were using these synthetic hormones and the ones that were made out of urine from horses, and why many women decided not to use hormones because of all the problems that were happening and were talked about in the women's health studies. So those are a few ideas. The other thing that I like to do is to encourage women to really create a relationship with the moon. And one of the ways to do that is by basically having different seeds that we eat from our menses to our ovulation. Then the seeds that we eat from ovulation to our period. So we have half of the month where we're eating certain seeds and the other half of the month where we're eating other seeds. Seeds are kind of like a metaphor for the whole creation of life, because a seed, you place it in soil and water in a healthy location and it will grow a plant, right? So eating seeds is kind of like supporting our female nourishing qualities. And it's typically recommended that from the new moon, if you're in tune with the moon, you would be getting your period on the new moon, to full moon, if you're in tune with the moon, you would be ovulating. But that would be a great time for having flax seeds and sunflower seeds, flaxseed oil, and pumpkin seeds. And then from full moon to new moon, we use evening primrose oil, because evening primrose oil is so supportive of the whole progesterone side of the cycle, which happens during that time. And then we would be eating sesame seeds and other seeds. So I thought it would be a really good idea to draw for you the whole cycle so that you can see what we're talking about. And then in a few minutes, we'll take you into the kitchen and show you how to do something simple that for many women is all they need to help to balance their hormones. So I'm going to draw a circle. Granted, not a perfect circle. I'm not a Zen master. And over here is going to be the new moon. And over here is going to be the full moon. Now the new moon if we were aboriginals and really, really healthy, would be the day one of our cycle. And the full moon would be our ovulation and day 14. And that's going to be right here. This is going to be right here. And then in the middle, let's grab a different color here. In the middle will be day 7. And down here will be day 21. Here, this is our estrogenic cycle. And that's going to be from here to here. And then our progesterone cycle is from ovulation to our period, day 1. Now, interestingly enough, if we were to draw the estrogenic cycle, this whole time from here to about day 7 is pretty much the same amount of estrogen. And from day 7, we slowly start building, really more probably from day 8, to this huge amount of estrogen, well, much larger amount of estrogen, just before ovulation. So if we were to draw the estrogen cycle down here, the estrogen cycle would look like day 1 would be here, about day 7 would be about here. We would go up to this big amount right at about day 13, 14, and then we would just drop down to that small amount, and then we would have that for the rest of the 28 days. So would be day 1. This will be day 13 or 14, and it starts to build right here at about day 7, and then it continues all the way around. This would be day 28, and 28 and 1 are the same amount. Now, interestingly enough, with progesterone, there's so little progesterone that really it appears that we have none from day 1 till we get to the full moon. And then this very interesting thing happens. So I'm just going to draw this for you from full moon to new moon. So full moon is going to look like that, and new moon is going to look like this. Full moon would be ovulation. And new moon is going to be our day 1, or our period, if we're still cycling. And what happens is that we were at 0, or a tiny little bit, and then at day 21, we hit this big amount. So it kind of looks like this. So we have like pretty much nothing all the rest of the cycle. But from here to here, if we were going to just draw this, it would look like that as far as amounts go. And this would be a tiny amount, and this would be a large amount of progesterone. And then the rest of the cycle, it's like practically nothing. So that's what this part would look like. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting is that there are seeds, and seeds represent life. A seed or an ovum, an ovary, produce the life that is going to make a new life. So you take a seed, you give it soil, you give it water, you give it sunlight, and then it grows. The seeds that support the estrogenic cycle are flaxseed and pumpkin seed. And the oil that supports this cycle is fish oil. And there are lignans in the flaxseed that help to support estrogens, but also break down harmful estrogens, the xenoestrogens. Now, if a woman is a vegan, there is a high DHA form of algae oil, which she could have instead. Okay? So these are our estrogenic seeds. And what you can do is use 2 tablespoons a day from new moon to full moon, from day 1 to ovulation, to day 14 of your cycle, 2 tablespoons a day. And with fish oil, it's always wonderful to build up to as much as your body is happy with. I use, I'll show you the ones that I use in a few minutes in the kitchen, but I start out with a teaspoon for new people, with always with a meal, because you'll get very mad at me if you have it without a meal. You'll be burping it for hours. But if you have it in the middle of your meal, that won't happen. I start out with a teaspoon and move to a tablespoon with breakfast and dinner. Or you can also use capsules. And I use a very yummy tasting oil. I always use ones that have not been heated, because the vitamin A and the vitamin D are very sensitive to heat. And almost all fish oils, except for the 2 that I work with, as far as I'm aware of, are using a heat process or a chemical process to remove the harmful toxins that are contributed to the fish oil from the sea. But instead, we can use a process of either just doing a raw extraction from really clean fish from a special part of the ocean, which is one of the fish oils that I use. And the other one is a fermented fish oil, which will get rid of those toxins. Now, the other side of our coin, from ovulation to new moon, is when we want to support the progesterone cycle. And we do that with, here's our progesterone, with ground sesame seeds or sunflower seeds. And again, we use that 2 tablespoons a day. And the oil that we use is evening primrose oil, EPO, or evening primrose oil. And that you can either take a teaspoon of, or there are capsules. So these are the ones that we would use from full moon to new moon to support our progesterone balance. And for many women, if they are just having a very small beginning of challenges with hormonal imbalance, or just some really simple issues, this is all that we need to really help them. One of the things I've also done is, right at this point, we have some support that we could really use from our pituitary gland. And I do a whole little process that I believe I've spoken to you about before with homeopathics. And that will be the subject for another little YouTube. But the bottom line is, day 1, we use a hormone to stimulate our health of our pituitary gland, which is involved with producing all of these hormones. They're stimulating the release of those hormones. Here we would be stimulating the pre-hormone that helps us with our estrogen. And here we would be taking a homeopathic of the actual ovum called ovarinum. And here we would be working with the hormone that's involved with stimulating the release of progesterone. And we would just take one pellet of each one of them, of each of those specific ones at each different time of the month. Okay, let's go to the kitchen. I happen to love this little device. It's a Blend Tech. It comes with a big blender top, which I do a lot of things with, all sorts of stuff actually. But I love this little one because I can use it for nut butters and for this little process that I'm talking about. This is organic flax seeds. And it makes a mighty sound, I have to warn you. But what I really love about this is that this lid can go on here and it can turn around to support the movement of the flax seeds while it's in here. So I'm going to go ahead and start this on low. Many people have coffee grinders and you can use that. And here we have our ground flax seeds. I always love to store them in the freezers and in glass. And I just did 2 tablespoons, but if you wanted to, you could literally do, 6 tablespoons at a time. Now, interestingly enough, and then put it all in the freezer, and then you don't have to do this every day. And, okay, I just want to show you that 2 tablespoons, when you grind it up, is a lot more than 2 tablespoons. You can see that, right? That's what's left over. So the amount that you're going to actually consume yourself is going to be the 2 tablespoons. Now, one of my favorite ways to eat this is, and I'm not a vegan. I actually tend to be more paleo, and even in the winter time, I oftentimes will go carnivore for a little while. But this is one of my favorite products, and in Austin, the only place I know to find it is Central Market. This is an organic creme fraiche from a wonderful company called Sierra Nevada. And because I'm always looking to increase my fat content, rather than, I would never eat anything low fat. First of all, nature never produces anything low fat. But one of my favorite ways to have this would be to take a nice dollop of creme fraiche, and then we've already measured out 2 tablespoons here. Add that, and then I personally really love, this is my organic flaxseed bag, and that you can get almost at any health food store and even at places like Costco. I love working with these flavored stevias because I don't use sugar very often. Sometimes I'll use a bit of honey, especially a special one that I now have from a wonderful beekeeping company that uses propolis in all of their bee products, and they do a lot with royal jelly. So anyway, you'll just blend this up. And if you are eating fruit, I just grabbed a couple of little things to show you. My favorites are the berries. My very favorite are these wild blueberries. And I'm just going to show you the difference because some people don't realize this. But a wild blueberry is smaller in size, purple all the way through, and will stain your teeth purple. You can look very cute after eating a whole bunch of wild blueberries. This is organic blueberries, a type that we typically can get very easily at health food stores. They're a lot bigger, as you can see. And look, inside, they're more white. The color indicates the amount of polyphenols. So we get an extraordinary amount of phenols, excuse me, I was going to say polyphenols because we're talking about women right now, but polyphenols in the wild blueberries. And typically those are only available in frozen because they're so hard to find. So I get my wild blueberries and these at Costco. And here's a little picture of the organic wild blueberries, but I've seen these at every health food store as well. And this blend here actually is really, really tasty. To me, it's almost like a dessert when I add the flavored stevia. This one happens to be English toffee, but there's dark chocolate, there's vanilla, there's lemon, there's pomegranate, all kinds of flavors. I don't see these in the health food store. I order them and typically have them available for my patients. Just so you know, I have an enormous pharmacy here at the house. And this is a fermented cod liver oil that I was talking to you about. And this one happens to be, it's kind of hard to read it in this light, but cinnamon tingle. It's very flavorful. And I actually enjoy the taste of this a lot. And I'll just drink a tablespoon straight, but a lot of people prefer to have this in a little warm water and drink it. And it's really not like drinking straight fish oil, which is really hard for me to do. This is an extraordinary brand of cod liver oil that a lot of people don't know about. They're fishing in really clean areas, and they're doing a very careful extraction of raw cod liver oil. So these are the others. And then I have something that we just simply call DHA oil, which is an algae oil capsule. The taste is horrendous. You would never want to take it straight. But I oftentimes will have mothers place a drop of it on their breasts while they're nursing their babies, because their babies can almost always use extra DHA. So if mom's not taking the DHA, we'll want to have baby get it by just suckling it off her nipples. And also that helps to get the baby used to tastes that we don't think we want to give them because they're not pleasant. We tend to want to give babies all these sugary, sweet things, but Aboriginal children never had those kinds of flavors before. So I really encourage moms to not be giving babies things like applesauce and apple juice that rots their teeth, but to be starting babies off with more of the foods that Aboriginal women have used with their babies always, like raw egg yolks, and believe it or not, liver. Whites of eggs have a type of protein, the albumin, which is very hard for a baby to digest. But the organ meats and the egg yolks are something that Aboriginal women all over the world have started babies with, particularly if they were for some reason unable to nurse. So anyway, our whole idea would be that this would be what we would be using during our new moon to full moon phase. And to save you all the noise and everything else, just know that you would do the same thing that I just did with flax seeds, with sesame and or sunflower seeds. It's kind of fun to change them up. These ground seeds are particularly delicious on a salad. They're also really good on a soup, as well as putting them into yogurt. If you're a vegan, you could use coconut yogurt. And you could also add them to a smoothie if you're doing smoothies in the morning or at other times during the day. So I hope that's given you some beneficial information about what you can do for yourself. It's a wonderful first step, and if this doesn't make a big difference in your hormonal functions, as we went over as far as the too much and too littles go, then we might want to have a discussion about what to do for you to support your hormones with homeopathics and or getting you some actual bioidentical hormones, ideally in your organic oils instead of creams. So I want to conclude this by just welcoming your questions, welcoming your interest, and also saying that I'm looking at the possibility of creating a little single day, possibly 2-day experience for women to come and to learn how to do things that are really beneficial for us. Things like breast massage that help to prevent breast cancer. Things like how to eat during the different sides of our cycle. Things like how to take a really good look at what we're putting on our skin that may be very toxic to us and creating health problems. Showing us special lifestyle things that we've talked about a lot, but actually doing them together, going out in the sun, doing exercise together in the early morning sun, getting the benefit from the sunrise and sharing the sunset, doing some female rituals that may come from different cultures, different meditations on what it is to be a woman, and doing things that really help to support our nervous system in being balanced and healthy. So if you have an interest in exploring something like this, please let me know, and that will encourage me to put it together. Okay, well, thank you so much for your attention, your time. I know there's many things you could be doing right now, and I appreciate that we've just spent this time together. Blessings to you beyond measure, and until next time, be happy, fulfilled, and well.